There's Anthony. He's here. And I'm sure Elizabeth is signing on as well.
Yes.
And there she is. Nicely done. Okay.
Okey doke.
All right.
How many customers do we have? 18.
18. Whatever you all, I will.
Should we give them another few minutes or
What do you think? I'm fine. I was waiting for you all and to see what you all thought. We have 19 now, so maybe I don't know.
But do we have enough committee members?
Let's see.
Oh,
Gail
Ed,
is here,
Elizabeth,
John is here,
Gail,
Sherry is here,
Sherry.
both of us.
I lost somebody else. Marco is here.
Marco is here. Adam is here. See Adam waving.
Adam.
we had a lot of people who aren't here, who asked to be excused. I think several.
I think Elizabeth and Craig.
Oh, and Peggy.
Oh, and Peggy. Right, Peggy.
If we're not going to do a resolution, I don't think that matters.
Okay.
So let's start.
All right.
I'll defer to both of you for starting. How's that? How's that for punting responsibility?
Okay. Well,
thank you, Anthony.
I guess we
We have
figured out
20.
that I would start. Oh, is George Janes here yet?
George is here.
Great.
There he is.
Okay, well, then let's welcome everybody to the June Zoning Development and Housing Committee. And first of all, I'll hand you over to, I guess it's Kevin, to tell you how we play the game.
Welcome. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you're currently muted, and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except for Elizabeth, Anthony, and Ed, and any presenters as we move through the agenda. As we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to the React icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you are using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please not raise your actual hand and wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome again George Janes, who is such a great addition to our committee meetings. And I'll hand it over to you, George.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I am going to share my screen, if I may. Okay. All right. So I prepared a relatively short presentation about housing. You see the agenda to talk about housing. This is relatively short, just to bring you up to date on what's happening, and also really, I hope, to facilitate a discussion. That I think is going to be the best part of this at the end. I really don't want to be spending much time talking. So, as probably some of you remember, in 2024, I summarized how affordable housing had changed in Community District 8. We first looked at rent stabilized housing, And Elizabeth or the co-chairs put out this table, except this one is more updated. This is 2027 or 2007 to 2022, showing the changes in rent stabilized units by community district in Manhattan. And the Upper East Side has lost the most. And there are some community districts that actually gained in the period. So there's gains, there's losses, and there's net. And the Upper East Side has lost the most net, though the Upper West Side actually lost more gross. But remember, not all rent stabilized units are affordable. And at a community board meeting, and this is something that DCP says all the time, right? They told this community board that you've lost no affordable housing according to their definition, because their definition of affordable housing is income restricted housing. Income restricted housing is the type of housing that requires an HPD lottery. And if you use that definition, there's no problem, right? You haven't lost any of that. And most of the rent stabilized units in Community District 8 are not income restricted. But even using their definition, and I've updated all this data, you've seen some of this from last year, but I updated it with current numbers. What we see using the open data data set that regularly updates the number of income restricted units created and preserved since 2014, Community District 8, over those 11 years, I guess, created 559 new units of income restricted housing, or 4% of the Manhattan total. For preservation, and this is important because most of the affordable housing we have now, and Community District 8 does worse. So it's preserved 2% of the Manhattan total of income restricted housing preserved. And, places that already have a lot of income restricted housing will see more of it preserved. Community District 11 is East Harlem. Community District 10 is Central Harlem. But there's still a lot in Community District 8, and it's not preserving very much. So where are we seeing these income restricted housing preserved and developed? This is a little map mapping out each one of them. The red ones are new construction affordable housing or income restricted housing, and the blue ones are preserved. Some of the Rupert Towers buildings were preserved apparently in the Mitchell-Lama program, but most of the actual new construction is on a single development in Roosevelt Island. It's actually the majority of the new construction is in a single development on Roosevelt Island. And this is all of them. So we actually have the individual data on this. And we can look to see what benefits, like what were they using to get this? And most of the new construction used the old 421A. And there's a smattering of others, especially in the preservation program, where they're essentially re-upping to extend their affordability. Now, most of you know that New York recently passed new regulations to encourage income restricted housing. 485X was passed in April of 2024, but its rulemaking was only finished in December of 2024. Same month that we passed City of Yes for housing opportunity, which it provided floor area increases to buildings with affordable housing or income restricted housing. And there are early indications that they may be producing some affordable housing. You may have noticed last month that there was a press release where the city was, saying 118 buildings representing roughly 2,600 new homes have shown intent to apply for 485X new construction tax incentive program. Now, just 3 of those 118 buildings were in Manhattan, and none were on the Upper East Side, which is Actually, if you remember what we were talking about in 2024, we were thinking that that these would be attractive programs for the outer boroughs and much less in Manhattan. But that being said, there are some projects that are in the pipeline and not yet appearing in the data. So this is on the Upper East Side, where 86th and First Avenue. It is approved with 2 buildings on this site. I know it looks like one, but there are 2 buildings here, each with 99 units. And the reason that is because 485X's wage requirements kick in when you have a building with 100 units. So it's better for them to build 2 buildings, building A and building B, with 99 units apiece, rather than a single building with 198 or however many units. And think about it like this. There are 2 building cores here. There are 2 sets of elevator banks. There are, 2 sets of stairs for each of the buildings. That's a substantial, that's like an inefficiency that is built into this little 2 building cluster here. And, the lesson to me is that the markets respond to incentives if those incentives are strong enough. But the focus of the new income restrictive incentives is new development. So 485X is for new multiple dwellings. Universal affordability preference is mostly applied to new multiple dwellings. You can use it in some additions. But most of the affordable housing we have is already here. And what can be done to better preserve existing affordable housing? And you should know I do a lot of zoning work. I'm not an affordable housing expert, but I can tell you what I see. So there are many incentives for income restrictive housing, but really only a few are very widely used. This is from HPD's website of all the different programs. And I'm going to use an example to try to illustrate one. City and suburban homes, the big development, 79th Street, 78th Street, and toward the water, saw this massive increase in rent stabilized housing. What happened there, right? So it decided to enter the J51 program, and which had this requirement. Well, essentially you're entering this program for rehabilitation of the building, and in exchange you have to have units enter rent stabilization. So there's this real quid pro quo. You get out these the J51 program subsidizes your rehabilitation, but in exchange, you have to have units that enter rent stabilization. And this, I think, is an incredible success, right? This is a building, it's a landmark. It couldn't be redeveloped, even though it has a lot of development rights associated with it, because it is a landmark. And so it entered the J51 program for rehabilitation, and in exchange made a lot of new rent stabilized units. And what's interesting about J51, not to pick on it more than others, but it's for rehabilitation. And it is a lot more popular in some neighborhoods than others, right? Central Harlem is 21% of all J51 units are in Manhattan. How does that happen? How do they get 21% of all of Manhattan's J51 units? What goes into that decision making? Maybe some people here can comment on that. I really don't know. And really it kind of begs the question of how can more incentives flow to other neighborhoods that need it? On the Upper East Side, it's been reported that rent stabilized units are remaining empty. Some, like 300 East 86th Street right here, it's been reported that this building is being emptied for redevelopment. But there are other older units that need rehabilitation. HPD did a study that there are a lot of units that are kept off of the market because of the need for rehabilitation. And there's this question. There are these programs in place, and what can be done to link owners to incentives so that they fix up their buildings so that the units can re-enter the market? I also have questions about the neighborhood differences in HPD utilization. Part of this is cultural, right? Where you have maybe a culture of owners who may know each other, or they talk and they say, "Oh yeah, have you tried using this program? It's helped me out." And maybe that's more common in some neighborhoods than others. I actually don't know. Um, but I think that there's an underrepresentation. HPD presence in the Upper East Side is, is lower, and the neighborhood is underserved. And what could be done to increase HPD's profile and the potential for more subsidies to rehabilitate units in these older buildings? And so in New York City, normally we use these incentives or carrots to get what it wants, right? But what about penalties or sticks to encourage leaving apartments vacant? This is something that comes up in other community districts, and it's something that is never really adopted. And there may be legal reasons for that. But, there's also other things. What could discourage the combinations of tenements, right? So 38 East 75th Street, which is pictured here, it filed an alteration to go from 9 units to one, right? And there's been this slow eroding of the tenements on the eastern side of the district into single and two-family homes, which some people welcome, but it really does put a huge dent in the housing stock. And then what about discouraging enormous buildings with few units? My favorite example is 1165 Madison at 86th Street, which is, an enormous building with 11 units averaging 5,500 square foot per unit. That's what I have to try to jumpstart the discussion. I'm hopefully hopefully some of you have answers or have more questions to some of these questions.
Thanks, George.
Thank you very much, George.
Can I ask?
I think that having, as HPD studied in the city, a couple of 100,000 vacant units, honestly, there must be some incentive created to put them back on the market, and a disincentive to keeping them all off the market. So, and I think that losing affordable housing on the one hand, and then saying you have to build it on the other, you're the frog in the well. So I would like Anthony to call upon the public and ask people what their ideas are.
All right. It looks like members of the public, it looks like the first one is Yasmina.
Hi, I only have more questions. Saccone Hall, if that's how you pronounce it, which is on York Avenue, is apparently they've applied for demolition, and something like half the apartments are vacant. And there's also, I believe it's City and Suburban on 64th in York, which we have friends who live in the building, and it's like living among ghosts in that building. And so my question is what can be done? How can these wonderful old apartments that do need rehabilitation, how can we advocate for them to be rehabilitated rather than demolished? I'm sure it's been asked many, many times.
Well, I know that there are programs in place, like the city has put the, like as J51, which is what I was talking about. There are programs in place to do that, but and in some neighborhoods, it's very highly utilized, but in this neighborhood, it's much less utilized. And so, really, the question is how do why aren't people using the program, right? Are they not using it because they don't know about it? Are they not using it because they hope to redevelop their project into something much larger? I think the one that you talked about on York Avenue, that's a very underbuilt building, right? And if it's so underbuilt, they're going to redevelop it as a big tower to make lots of money. That's my expectation. I don't know. But there's a lot of these buildings like on the mid blocks, on the side streets where they can't build a big tower. And so what's happening on those buildings? Do we see the same sort of vacancy issue there? Or are they getting rehabilitated privately without these funds? I, I, I think a lot of them are not using the program, and we should know more. I mean, we should know more about that, and maybe it's something that the committee would like to consider inviting people from HPD to come in who know really much more about this firsthand.
Thank you, George. Oh, just not quite parenthetically, just about the particular examples you brought up, Yasmina. Saucony Hall is not a landmark, not in a landmark district. However, the city and suburban houses are individual landmarks. And so even if nobody's living there, it would be almost impossible for anyone to do anything to them. If there aren't a lot of if there are a lot of vacancies, I have no idea why. Yeah, I mean, I believe you. I just have no idea why.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say the example I used on City Suburban is the one further north. It's the one
Right.
on 79th Street. I don't know what's happening to the one down in the 60s. But maybe they can learn from each other.
Yes.
And maybe they could get the rehabilitation program and fill up their building again.
Okay. Do we have other members of the public? All right. Unless we get some more, Sherry, you're up.
George, I'm making an assumption that the apartments in the 3 and 4 story older buildings are affordable, or certainly more affordable than market rate. We seem to be in a losing battle. What we see in the Upper East Side is that they continuously tear down these small buildings that have a variety of apartments, and then the high rises are approved, which don't have any affordable housing. So what needs to change in this scenario that we're not constantly losing affordable apartments without replacing them?
Sorry, go ahead. We have a proposal that is dying of old age, I think, for special zoning districts on our
Yeah, but why are they
first,
not?
second, third, and York, and what part of that proposal was to preserve all the tenements with it, if they're affordable or whatever kind of thing. But I think what Cherry is talking about is that what we want to create incentives for is building affordable housing, but the housing that we get is solving the problem of homeless billionaires, and which is hardly serious.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're doing something very wrong when we take down affordable housing and rehouse Jeff Bezos and whatever. So
he's busy in Venice getting married. So,
Sherry, I will say this is that the old tenements were all built before 1974, and so at one time either are or were at one time rent stabilized, but a lot of those during the last 20 years came off of rent stabilization through the luxury decontrol program. And so very often you have, but that stopped in 2019. You can no longer deregulate the units like that. And so you end up with a lot of these buildings, even the tenements on the mid blocks are a mixture, right? They're a mixture of market rate for tenement buildings and rent stabilized units. And so you'll have like a 20 unit tenement with maybe 5 rent stabilized units, or maybe 15. It all depends on the situation, the situation in that particular building. And on the mid blocks, though, the zoning there largely preserves them, right? You very often you rarely see those tear downs in the mid blocks, right?
Yeah, it's on the corner. It's on the corners.
It's
Yeah.
on the avenues. And
Right.
the reason we see it there is because there is a mismatch between the built form and what zoning would allow. And the zoning allows for these, very large buildings on the wide streets. And so therefore we see them replaced. And that's a process that's been happening in New York City for 100 years now, right? And we saw East 86th Street build up and Park Avenue build up. You still see a couple of the old tenement buildings on Park Avenue, but they're almost all gone, right? And so that's a pattern, and it's a pattern that's permitted by zoning. If you don't like that pattern, you have to change the zoning really to make that happen. And I think, I think that's a very heavy lift. I know that, as Elizabeth said, you have an old proposal that's out there to do that. It's a very heavy lift with this administration. I think a lighter lift is focusing on, the units that aren't being well utilized and trying to match owners with subsidies, right? There's money out there to help try to get some of these units reoccupied. How do you get HPD to practice more here, to market more here? How do you get the owners to go to HPD to use those monies to try to get more of these units back into the market?
Thank you.
Thanks, George. It's an important point that as zoning changes, the character of the neighborhood changed. Before 1925, buildings on Fifth Avenue were more or less 5 or 6 story, frankly, individual mansions. And after that zoning change, they were almost all torn down and replaced with apartment houses. Yep. And so I think that I think also that obviously you are correct that it is a very heavy lift to get city planning to do a zoning change that would restrict development in any way. Okay, let's go.
It's me.
Well, yes, Sasha, go ahead. Oh, it just
thanks. Yeah, no, I was off mute, but I was listening to what you were saying. Anthony, you're spot on. City planning is not going to approve anything or support anything that restricts development. I love hearing this topic as a discussion point for community board. I work in real estate development and planning for the city. So I've worked at HPD, DCP. Great. I currently work at EDC. So this is all very intimately intertwined with what I talk about with my coworkers and just in my personal life. But, the city planning has an initiative to always look at 30 years in the future. And something I struggled with there was being told, we're not here to really focus on the now, we're here to look at future people. So to me, they have very much what I would call an inherent bias against tenement buildings. They don't see the value in them. They see, okay, maybe you lost 20 rent stabilized units, but you added a net of 200 more units. And to them, that is more valuable. You know, and I'm not going to comment whether or not I agree on that, but that is how they look at things. Now, what's interesting in talking about all the subsidy programs that are out there, because there are a lot, and I always wonder why more and more people don't utilize J51. I live in a building that was a J51 building in like 1975. There was no, you know, regulatory agreement at the time, but it was, you know, by definition, rent stabilized. My building is still currently 50% rent stabilized, with all of us being here since the 70s and 80s. And I'm the classic building that is not maintained. And my building would actually benefit from re-upping J51 and forcing us all to enter into a regulatory agreement, because our rent would be reset likely to a higher amount than people currently pay. And I know that's a tension I've seen while at HPD when I worked in multifamily leverage financing, which is the Article 11 tax abatements, that tenants did not want to enter into regulatory agreements because their rent would be reset, or HPD would tell them, get a housing voucher so we can reset your rent. Now what I've thought about and ruminated on is why the city doesn't look into using city capital as a renovation program to get units back online. Because what I see is a lot of landlords and management companies saying it's not worth the amount we have to put in to renovate individual units. But of course, their idea of a renovation is gut kitchen, brand new appliances, you know, and I say this, my building, none of the floors were leveled, and anyone rent stabilized hasn't had a renovation in over 50 years. And my building also regularly, illegally destabilizes units. Someone dies, it just disappears off of HCR's record. Someone moves out, it disappears off of HCR's record. You know, and they make up that amount of money. You know, like their renovation of 50K, whatever it may be, they're starting to put in washers and dryers with the old plumbing, you know, in units that absolutely can't handle it. But I'd love to see, and you know, obviously funneling city capital to landlords, a lot of people would have a problem with, but there's clearly an unwillingness to enter into these programs, and they'd rather either keep units offline until hopefully vacancy increases return or something of that sort for them, then actually put in the renovation and keep the unit stabilized. And it's funny to me to see all these landlords claim, well, there's nothing we can do, when it's that easy with HCR to just deregulate a unit. Again, units in my building go for over $5,000. The previous tenant was paying, let's say, 4 times less than that. You know, and they did not put in $400,000 worth of renovations on these units. But I think landlords don't want to enter into programs where they're going to be stuck with the regulatory agreement. And it's so profitable if you can sell a tenement to do it. If there's zoning potential, I mean, I know behind me, the East 94th Street rezoning, that garage went for 37 million. Imagine being a garage owner and you can make 37 million off of your garage. It's almost like a no-brainer for people. With what Taconic bought between 94th and 95th, between 2nd and 1st. All of those parcels, I think it was 78 million, something like that. So for owners of buildings, whether it's a large management company or any individual owners left, it's hard to beat how lucrative it is to just sell your land. It's really that difficult. But before I go off anymore, I did want to ask George about 45X. It's great to see, just as intel for myself, that on 86 they're doing two 99 unit buildings. We talk about this a lot of what people are going to look to do with 485X. Do you have any inkling if they're going based on what is considered a DOB separate building, or is just having two building cores with elevators and staircases enough? I'm curious if
I think it has to be a DOB separate building, meaning it's got to
okay.
have a firewall between them,
Yes.
so they can't be connected. They have to have
Okay.
two separate cores. That's my understanding. I think Adam Wald is here. He may have a different opinion on that, but I think that's the safe way to do it. Is it's got to have two separate buildings according to DOB.
Okay.
George, can I piggyback real quick in there? Sorry to jump the line real quick, but to the part that Sasha was raising about the land being so lucrative, is that also the reason why on the island of Manhattan itself, we also see such a dearth of new units and the loss of so many income restricted units? Just to piggyback on that, is that part of it as well?
Well, I mean, it's
That is to say,
if the land is expensive, so if you talk to affordable housing developers, right, they will tell you what their biggest problem is. The biggest problem is that the land costs so much, right? And so if your land value is really high, it's really hard to do affordable housing. And I will also say this is that in other like when the city owns property. They very often use it to do 100% affordable housing, but not everywhere, right? So the Gansevoort Meat Market is going to be a mixed income development. 100 Gold Street, which is a city-owned property, is going to be a mixed income development. And it's just like, I guess in one hand, I understand that, it's really valuable land. And do you want to use this really valuable land for 100% affordable housing? And they're making the choice in some neighborhoods not to do that, which it's fascinating to me that even government is bent to the power of the market and the value of the land.
I will just jump in and say that that is my department at work that released both of those RFPs. So I do know quite a bit about them, even though those aren't my projects. And usually we find that HPD is the one doing the 100% affordable RFPs on land because they have the most control over the
Yes,
subsidy and their
absolutely.
pipeline. And HDC if they're issuing bonds. Any other city adjacent like EDC, we don't always get the leverage with that, and sometimes we have to turn to things like mixed use, mixed
Sure.
income instead. But yes, that's exactly it. In neighborhoods that are what you'd consider very valuable, land is super valuable. We have to cross subsidize, and that's what we kind of see all over the city is you need the market rate units to help offset the cost of affordable. So the deeper affordable you want that high rent from the meatpacking district or downtown or the Upper East Side, because that just helps leverage whatever limited city subsidy there is to
Yep.
still get affordable units to the market. And both of those sites didn't have housing on it previously. So it will be new that there will be housing on those sites. But thank you, George.
The only comment I was going to make was that, yes, my understanding is these are two separate buildings. But going back to 485X and 421A, what's important to remember is that under the old 421A, the 2017 version, which was now extended into 485X, if you demolish any units, all of those units in your new building have to be affordable. So look at 1655 First Avenue, 355 East 86th Street. Yes, they're doing 299 unit buildings, but there were 33 residential units there, which means that a minimum of 33 residential units have to be affordable in your new building. So that's one way that they're replacing the stock of rent stabilized units, because all of the units that were demolished, even if they were market, even if they weren't stabilized, they all have to be replaced as affordable units in your new 485X building. So that's one way the city is incentivizing, quote unquote, replacement of rent stabilized housing units.
Adam, is that at the same rent when they demolish the building? Because obviously they're not moving into a union the next month.
You just have to comply with 485X, if it's less than 99 units, it's 80% AMI. If you go over the 149 units, it's 60% AMI. So those are, in many cases, those are far below what the rent stabilized rent was on a 2-bedroom, 4th floor walk up on the First Avenue or Second Avenue. The new rent for a 2-bedroom at 60% AMI is far below what the rent probably was. So.
Okay.
Thank you, Adam. Just one quick comment on one of the things that Sasha said that I think is very important is that city planning's lack of interest in the present versus an imagined future. And since we've had over 100 years of the equivalent of the Department of City Planning doing zoning based on projections, in 1916, the projection built into that the original zoning was that the city would have in 1960 16 million people. And in 1960, when they rewrote the zoning, the Department of City Planning suggested that by the year 2000, there would be 20 million people living in New York City. And so it's a shame they're not better at projecting the future than they are. Okay, so next we have Dylan and then Alita.
I just wanted to jump off of something that Sasha had said about, and I guess you were touching on it again, the importance or the perceived importance from city government about building new affordable housing versus preserving the old ones. Obviously, we do want to push back on that. We do want to preserve existing affordable housing. But when you showed the new income restricted housing being built, the Upper East Side was pretty low, I believe even low compared with other spots in Manhattan. And if I recall right, I think Community District 4 was really high, which I think also has very high land values. So I'm wondering if there are any practices that are being applied elsewhere in the city and in Manhattan with high land values that we can kind of copy to encourage the creation of more income restricted affordable housing, understanding that that's something the city might be more on board with.
Yeah, let's take a look at that again, because that's worthwhile to talk about. All right, so what's happening elsewhere in terms of the creation numbers? Hold on, let me pull that up. Okay, this is the creation. So this is, again, it's over the last, since 2014. And this is the new stuff. And so number one is Community District 4. And well, let's talk about Community District 4 and 11, right? What happened in both of them? There have been rezonings, Hudson Yards and Community District 4, and in 11 you have the 2017 East Harlem rezoning, East Harlem corridors, and also in East Harlem there's a huge focus on developing publicly owned land. And with 100% affordable housing. Sorry, let me bring that back up. Okay, yeah, here. So, and this number in Community District 11 is just going to keep going up because there are lots of things in the pipeline. And the thing in there, I'm talking about there because I know that area better, is that they had a lot of publicly owned land, and that's the kind of thing that not every community district has. And when you have, an acre over here, an acre over there of publicly owned land, and you're rezoning it to 12 FAR, you're ending up producing enormous amounts of 100% affordable housing. And so in some ways, these are not apples to apples comparisons. But there are still things to learn as you try to lever what you can. In this community district, for instance, you've had the use of what they call the ECF program, the Educational Construction Fund program, which is a way that we build new schools in much of Manhattan. Is the school construction authority doesn't pay for it. What we do is we take a school-owned site with an old dilapidated school. They use the land value to essentially build a big apartment building and a new school. And there's a question to be asked, and there's one of these sites, not in your district, but across the street from your district at 96th Street and 2nd Avenue, that is being used to build 3 new schools and some amount of affordable housing. I guess the question is should we be leveraging publicly owned land for new schools, affordable housing, both, or prioritize one over another? There will be likely more ECF projects in this district coming up, but there's not a lot of other publicly owned land here. But there's each of these districts that are doing better than the Upper East Side have their own story. The Lower East Side had a rezoning. That's District 3 had a rezoning in 2008, where it mapped optional inclusionary on almost all of the avenues. And so it's still getting a lot from there, from that rezoning. 10, I'm not sure about. I'm imagining that 10, because that's Central Harlem, that still has a lot of publicly owned land, that it's getting redeveloped at 100% affordable housing. But yeah, each one of the stories I think are a little different.
I do notice, of course, there's a common thread of rezonings there.
Yeah.
I know we were recently working on a rezoning of some of the industrial
Right.
lots for residential. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but do you have any sense of scale as to how that compares to these other rezonings that have produced thousands of units?
Oh yeah. So okay, that's a really good point, and I should have brought that up. I neglected to do that. So as most of you know, your community board has recommended a rezoning for the C8 and M1 districts in your area for residential uses, and it's it would be a substantial change of uses. There's not a ton of these areas, but there's enough to move the needle, right? You get 560 new income restricted units over 11 years, you'd be massively increasing the amount of capacity. Well, not massively, but you would be increasing the amount of capacity, and it would move the needle for sure if you ended up doing that, or if those areas were actually rezoned. I do not know what the plan is for that.
So thank you very much. I appreciate your answers.
Thank you. Alita.
Thank you. Thank you, George. With respect to the building on 94th Street, when they came and they asked for rezoning, we asked for 30% affordable housing, and they said they couldn't afford it. So that's one thing. Despite all the real estate that they own on Madison Avenue and Lexington Avenue, they said they couldn't afford it. 2, it's interesting that when I was chair and going to borough board meetings, I remember the then chair of CB4 in Community District 4 talking about how they had leverage over developers that were asking for more height. And they said, if you want more height, you have to put in more affordable units. We don't have that leverage because on 4 major residential avenues, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and York, we don't have height limits. So they're not asking for more. They don't come to us for more. They never come to us. If they did come to us for more, we'd be able to say, put in some affordable housing units and see what they said. 3, on city-owned land, I think it's a bit of a red herring to talk about the value of city-owned land because the city owns it. It doesn't matter whether they bought it for $1 in 1795 because they own it. So what difference does it make how much the land is worth? They should be putting affordable housing units on it, period. With respect to the building, I think on Gansevoort, my understanding is, and perhaps I'm wrong about this, that those affordable units will only remain affordable for 30 years, which brings me back to the point I originally wanted to make with respect to thinking about the future. And it was interesting that 30 years was mentioned because that seems to be the lifetime of affordable units on properties where they get bonuses for height or bulk, or they get city-owned land to begin with. And that's just plain wrong. Why are the affordable units not affordable in perpetuity? The developers get some kind of benefit forever, and the people who live in affordable units don't. The last thing is why are landlords allowed to warehouse units, period? There is way too much given to developers in this city and way not enough given to other people. Back to the city of Yes, where there is not one affordable unit that is required in the entire massive rezoning amount that plan puts on the whole city. And now the city is coming crying that they need affordable units. So they have the Manhattan plan. They want to upzone the garment district and put 600 businesses out of business. I saw half your presentation, George. There's a lot that the city wants to do in the name of affordable housing when they had a chance to do it and they chose not to. So I just, and it threatens businesses and it threatens people who live there and it threatens an industry that makes New York unique. So there is really something massively wrong with how this city looks at residential units. Plus the way the prices are going up and up and up. All the reasons that people want to live in New York, access to restaurants, to different communities, to theater, to culture, all of that disappears when places can no longer afford the rents, all the small stores. Anyway, I will stop there. I've made all my points, I think, and thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Alita. Hold off a minute, Sasha. We'll go to Marco first since he hasn't spoken yet. Marco.
Thank you, Anthony. I have a conversation with city planning this weekend, and the idea is they want to build 100,000 dwelling units in each borough, which is the plan of Mayor Adams. He, at the beginning of his administration, that's what he said, and he came up with the idea with 109,000 units, which is short, very short what they expect. So the point is very simple, with all respect. But when we talk about housing, we cannot compare with the other neighborhoods because our neighborhood is unique. So therefore, in our neighborhood, again, I'm coming back what I has been saying before. We are the densest community board, and therefore we are not planning to increase no more affordable. The affordable housing should be limited. What is more important for us is to preserve the affordable housing. But the problem is, if you wanted to preserve affordable housing through this governmental money, they're not going to do that because the developer, they said, I don't need that. The only thing is, since the city doesn't control the density, they control the maximum density, but they don't control the low density. So this is all the towers on First, Second, and Third Avenue. All of them, the maximum density is 54% through 24%. So that means this is luxury housing. So without any possibility to build affordable housing or rebuild what they demolish. In addition to that, that playing the role of the air right transfer. That is wrong because you transfer the air rights, the developer, they build luxury housing, and the area or the buildings that produce these air rights, they have violations. They have environmental control violations and they receive millions of dollars and they are unwilling to obey the law to fix or to cure the violations. And the city is inept to say, look, you're going to sell the air rights, fix it your building before you transfer the air rights. But the city doesn't do that. And the city, the idea is to come in with 100,000 units. It's easier for in the infield of NYCHA, they have right there, they can rebuild all of them because this is a flood area. And by the way, when we talk about the two buildings is because of the technical issues. The technical issue, you cannot build 200 wide building because of the expansion and contraction of the concrete. And you need to create the joint expansions. And when you create joint expansions, you can create every 100 feet or less. So then you really need, it's a technical issue, it's not a DOB issue, because it's impossible to build a building for 200 feet wide because of the expansion and contraction of the materials, period. So the point is, let me go back what I was saying. When you build something, especially I'm following Excel. Excel is the most knowledgeable developer. And Alida is blaming the developers. No, I don't blame the developers. Excel learn what city planning does. And he read very well and take advantage the best that they can. And so this is what they put it right there on 79th Street on First Avenue, demolish 79 dwelling units, and then they build zero luxury housing, zero affordable housing. They don't build anything. With respect about the mention of the project on York Avenue, yes, I met with the tenants, and the issue basically what it is you cannot rebuild something that is not profitable for the owner. I think Adam Wall knows very well, so he's not going to make money repairing those buildings. Sorry to say that, but they go for what is called the buyouts. And I think that is the only solution. And it's sad to lose this affordable housing. And sorry for that. And I explained to them that the only option that they have is they cannot be evicted because there is some protections in the law. And this is according with the Department of Buildings and according with the state regulations or the rent control and rent stabilization. So the issue and there are two big blocks down over there, 64, 63, 60. Well, there are two buildings. One of them is Landmark and the pink building that it cannot touch. The other building, that's I think you're referring, yes, the problem is 50% approximately is vacant, and some of them they are reaching an agreement to do the buyout. That is sad. That's what they want to do it, and we don't have to say anything. With respect, Anthony, I think I'm going to catch you. I disagree completely even though that you do opposite. I disagree completely why you don't report in Landmark when they reduce from 5 dwelling units, 3 dwelling units to 1 dwelling units. And I think landmarks, I know that it is wealthy people that live over there, but we have to connect housing with that. And if they are willing to reduce because there is no regulation to protect density in the lower part, and as we have an apartments for the last one that I saw is 19,000 square feet for one family. One family probably of two, and they have swimming pool on the lower, and they came for a little bit more for the rooftop addition. So the issue is that will be you have to have a discussion in Landmark because I know that you report very smart you report. But the issue we had to discuss at the time of in Landmark that part because we are losing affordable housing and or at least middle income housing. And that's what we need. So protect this kind of housing. And I think I'm gonna end because I think all this issue I raised with city planning because they say that they want to build 100,000 units in Manhattan in each borough. So I think it's more for political ideas rather because they really want to resolve the issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
I'd like to put in a few cents here with the idea that it doesn't pay a landlord to renovate his apartment to bring it back on. In HPD's study of the nearly 200,000 vacant units here, 52,000 were vacant because of renovation. And the renovation, 22% the renovation needed is they're waiting for a refrigerator. 28% are waiting for a new stove. 21% are waiting for new countertops, and 22% are waiting for a new kitchen. I honestly think that one really doesn't have to keep one's apartment off for waiting for a refrigerator. I think there is some other incentive that makes them keep their apartments off. And I think that's one of the things we have to investigate and recommend that they develop an incentive. Renovate, yes, when needed, do it quickly, but a disincentive for keeping it off the market. It must be a disincentive, or you wouldn't keep it off just because you haven't bought a refrigerator.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, we can go back to Sasha.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to respond to some things I heard just to clarify, if possible. So I know, Alita, you mentioned about Gainsvort and 45X only being, rent stabilized for 35 years for the tax abatement. Under 45X, units are permanently affordable. So even when the abatement expires, those units must remain affordable. So that's a good thing about 45X. Whereas with 421A, that was not the case. So permanent affordability is built into those. The 30 years, and especially with looking at 421A buildings, a question I always had working either at a firm or anything about like city and tax abatements, I'd say, what do we do after 25 years, after 35? Like, what happens to these? And a lot of times the answer is developers will go back to re-up the abatement or seek another kind of abatement. And in return for that, they must extend affordability. So that's kind of what we see happening in the new construction market with affordable housing units. It doesn't function the same as if you look at like classically rent stabilized units, buildings pre-1974. And another frustration that I'm hearing from people here, and one I've had, is that the city and the government can't regulate private property the way we think they can. So, for better understanding of this, if an owner of a building that's rent stabilized says, I want to use your unit, let's say it's 3B, I want to use your unit. I have my daughter, she's back from college, she needs that unit. Most times, the landlord will win that. It's called owner's use. And there's nothing the city or anyone can do to stop them from doing it because it's private property. So on city-owned land, you're not going to see that happen. But with privately owned property, unless they're getting some kind of incentive from the government, you really can't regulate what they're doing. And that's frustrating because I think we feel like, well, government should step in and do things, but that's not what happens with private property in this country or in this city. And unfortunately, our district has a very low amount of city-owned land. So we're not seeing affordable housing like we see in other parts of the city. And we also lose on the avenue tenements to a lot of like medical building development. I think we all know that and see that, like Marco mentioning Extel. And we also lose parkland. The Easton on 92nd was a public park. That is where I went for playground in preschool. And they put up a luxury high rise with a private school underneath it. And that was, I think, Bloomberg admin into de Blasio, but that was the city giving up parkland to build housing, which maybe some people at city planning would say, well, there was no housing there, and now we have X number of units, and all housing is good housing. And that's kind of another thing I hear in the urban development world, as long as you're building units, it's good, without thinking of what the consequence of that is. And there really aren't that many public parks dispersed throughout this district versus other districts. But yeah, I think what I hear the most is like, why can't the government do this? And it's because it's private property. And that's why city-owned land is so valuable, because the city can or tries to leverage as much as possible while making developers actually build something. Because in spite of whatever we think, it's still incredibly expensive to build. Like, it is not slap together a 5-story tenement. Just building code regulation is so much more expansive and expensive. Materials, labor is really costly. So yes, just to say, Gansevoort 45X, all of that is permanent affordability. So that should be a positive moving forward when we see things being built with 45X, that it's permanently affordable.
Okay, Yasmina, Marco, and Oya.
Hi, Sasha, I just wanted to say thank you for all that information. You've answered questions that I had in my head, and one glaring question to me is, what does city planning consider success? Like, when you're talking about a 30-year vision, is quality of life in there? Is the environment in there? Are ethics in there? We have just on my block, there's 1233 York Avenue, which was over 300 units of housing being demolished for now a 500-foot MSK building, but housing was demolished and not replaced. We have warehousing of affordable units. Somehow that's okay. I am torn about this idea of we need the government to step in, and yes, it's private property, government hands off. So I'm torn, but that's where ethics comes in. Like, how is city planning considering the future without quality of life? We have 2 small playgrounds in this neighborhood for kids under 5, and they are one is off the FDR. Like, that's how valued our kids are. That land is such a premium that our kids don't get to play on it. They have to play under the FDR at 24 Sycamore. And then our kids have to play at St. Catherine's, which is going to be renovated, which you're going to be talking about later. I think the blood center, apparently it's going to be renovated from a community benefits agreement with that. So yeah, it's very curious, befuddling to me to try and understand what city planning considers success. I don't know if it's economic. I don't know if it's the number of housing units, because we're losing housing units and certainly quality of life.
Thank you. Very good point. Oops, did we lose Marco?
Oh, he's there.
Marco put his hand. Oh no, Marco's hand is okay. Go ahead, Marco.
Oh, thank you, Jasmine. The issue is, I think I mentioned to Department of City Planning this weekend, is in our community in the period of COVID, the whole esplanade was not enough. The parks that we have, it wasn't not enough. Indeed, the East End Avenue was closed. It wasn't enough. So city planning knows that we have a large deficit. For us, more important than housing, to build housing, is open spaces. And the open spaces, the idea was a wonderful idea of the POPs, but POPs, I had to say, was corrupted and then become a private property. So the developers, they took advantage of that program to have their own benefits and don't give the community anything. A good example I'm going to mention right now is what the director of city planning Mr. Dan Garonik, he said publicly in one of the hearings, he said he was doing a political meeting in one of the pubs, which is right, by the way. He didn't do nothing wrong. And the super came out and he said, out, this is private property. He explained who he was. And he said, well, I'm going to stay right here. So he called the police. The police came. He explained who he was, who he was, and the police department left. So that means explain clearly that the developers, they take advantage anything, and probably that is correlated with the next topic that we're gonna discuss, MSK, the blood center. So the developers always they take advantage. We never have a good public policy. And yes, we have to remember one more thing. We are living in the capitalism. We have to protect, and I'm in favor of that, to protect the private property. And you cannot go against the private property. I strongly support that part. So, however, where I disagree is the institutions, rather to create an inclusive public policy, they create a segregationistic policy. They try to establish an spatial segregation by income. Poor people out, rich people stay in or bring in. So that is a good public policy that we had to ask city planning. That's the public policy we asked to all political reps in our community, that they have to establish an inclusive society. This is, I believe, that we shouldn't evict our residents. We have to protect them. And but the problem is you cannot protect because the developers, they are too smart. They said, well, since I'm not using public funds, I'm going to put luxury housing. How are you going to resolve that part? Control the low density. And if you control the low density, and then you have an opportunity, they are forced to, without being a socialist country, maintaining the socialism. If you increase the density, they are obligated to produce at least luxury housing and middle income housing, and probably a few affordable housing, and even control the higher the buildings. That is Elizabeth just mentioned, First, Second, and Third Avenue and York. That basically give you a more leverage the community to ask to create affordable housing. We create inclusionary housing. So this is the good plans that the city planning doesn't want to do that, because it is more oriented to the developers. And the developers, they come and they said, give me that, and they had to give it to them because that is also right of development. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Alita, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasha, for making that clear. But I did read that the housing in the meatpacking district was only temporary. I think that was the underpinning the rezoning, upzoning of Soho and NoHo as well. But maybe something the committee should think about is a comprehensive city plan that puts in the things that we need. In addition to housing, we need green space. We need to make sure we have enough utilities for everybody. We shouldn't be getting warnings this early in the season about blackouts and brownouts. We need more subways. We need more buses. We need just a lot. We need schools and we need seats, and there are just so many things. And the approach, and I understand it is a profit system. We should not be surprised when the people who build buildings seek to maximize the profit that they get. It's when they don't always tell the truth about what they intend to do, or they try to evade the promises they make in order to get what they want to build, that's really a problem. And therefore, since it is profit seeking, we need to find ways to use city property in a non-profit making way that benefits the city. There are a lot of conflicts between the profit world of market rate housing and the need for not just low income people, but middle income people to have a place to live in this city. And it seems that everyone except the market rate are getting a short shrift. So the plan that was put forth by the former speaker, or maybe two speakers ago of the city council, was horrible. And I'm not suggesting that. And there's certainly an inclination of this administration, as indicated by its charter commission conversations, to rid the city of community input, whether it's community boards or city council members. But I would argue that community is needed to come up with a comprehensive city plan, and it should include where hospitals go, where other medical services go, colleges, all the way down to pre-K. There just needs to be a way of looking at it. Otherwise, it feels like the city is under control of the developers who are seeking to make their profit, but not seeking necessarily to be good neighbors or to be effective, positive members of the community. So thank you again, Sasha, for laying that out, and thank you for letting me speak again. But I guess so that to sum it up, a comprehensive city plan with the significant input of community, including council members. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Seeing no one else wishing to comment, I think we can move on to our second topic. It is nodding. Elizabeth?
Several people have brought this up because the community board unanimously opposed this monstrous rezoning for the blood center. And I think we probably all remember that they wanted this huge tower on top because they had to renovate their rebuild the blood center, which is an admirable institution.
Thank you, Marty Bell.
Hmm?
I said, thank you, Marty Bell, for putting the sketch up behind himself.
Oh, okay.
No.
Where I don't know, but two things from when they got the proposal, it was approved. We did not win anything there. Two subsequent things happened. The tower was paid for the restoration of the building because that was the only way they could do it. Subsequently, they've got this huge, let me see if I have the numbers. It's going 187,000 square feet of property in Westchester County, which they got without any sub. So the community board and our committee asked that the zoning change be reversed because they proved that they didn't need what they said they needed. And our position, let me record it. We asked that this be reversed. Nothing happened. But this other development really is the non-development. It's gone on and on and on and on, and it has not been built. So I think that the fact that they had enough assets to get all this land out in 187,000 square feet of property proves that they didn't need the money. And the fact that they haven't built anything means they really didn't need the thing. So I think that what people want to push again is to have this reversed. And that's what we will be talking about. And I think several members of the public have approached me, very, very knowledgeable on the subject. And so I hope they've come to the meeting. But are any members of the public here to speak on the blood center? Yasmina?
Yes, I wasn't here for that purpose, but I would like to speak on it. I think that that absolutely makes sense. If you're applying for rezoning for a very specific purpose and reason, and that reason and purpose is no longer here, and you haven't done what you set out to do, it seems absolutely common sense to be able to reconsider that rezoning approval. So I would absolutely support revoking that approval if that's possible.
Okay, Maggie?
Thanks for recognizing me. I'm hoping that some others who are on this call for this particular topic will also speak. I had a few hours ago emailed you, Anthony Cohen, and Will, asking if anybody, perhaps George James, if you're still in this meeting, can remember what the restriction was that was put into place at the time of the city council vote, the last step of the ULURP process. And we all remember that there were negotiations going on between and among some members of the city council and the blood center reps and whoever was representing the community. And one of those part of those negotiations resulted in a restriction, I think, a restriction on the use, just what the last speaker referenced. Can anybody clarify that? George, can you, or Anthony, can you, or Elizabeth, can anyone clarify that? Because indeed, if in fact one of the reasons for the non-movement, Elizabeth, as you described it, one of the reasons for the non-movement is a lack of incentive to move forward with a life science development that would help in perhaps either reversing the rezoning decision or somehow putting it to bed. Anyway, can anyone on CB8 or George, can you discuss that restriction?
If the chair permits, I can discuss that.
Yes, please do.
Okay. So there is a restrictive declaration that is placed on the deed that reflects the negotiation with City Council. And it's basically, this is from memory. I looked at it, more than a year ago, but from memory, what it says is that they have to do something materially similar to what was approved, ultimately at the end of the day, which was not the 300 and some foot building, it was the 200 and some foot building, where they knocked off a lot of the height. However, there are some changes to that. Number one is that if there is a significant rezoning that affects the use and the bulk on the site, the restrictive declaration becomes essentially void. And the thing is that with City of Yes for economic opportunity, the uses were dramatically changed, where these life science uses became much more common. You didn't need a special permit anymore for that use. And then for housing opportunity, there were changes to the bulk. And so the question is whether that restrictive declaration is well, of course it is still in effect, but could it be lifted under the argument that there has been a rezoning and they no longer need to follow that restrictive declaration? I think they still do. However, I think a aggressive attorney might actually argue that those changes constitute a material change to the zoning, and so the restrictive declaration is no longer valid. And but that's not, no one's proposed that, right? It's still there on the books, and you know, anything saying that they might do that is speculative. I had a question for Elizabeth that I'm going to throw in here myself. Is, have you heard anything from the Blood Center? I know in public comments they have said that they are still moving forward with their plans, and I was wondering if you had heard anything contrary to that.
Not, nothing at all.
Okay.
I think they have repeated that thing along the way, that they're still going to do it, but yet have to do so. So I don't think we probably can. I don't think we can make much out of that one, but I think the fact that they don't, and you know, and then don't and don't and don't. If you really need something and you don't do it, it's a bit contradictory.
Right. One last thing about the restrictive declaration that I neglected to say is that we did go to city council because the other party in the restrictive declaration is the city council. And their attorneys believe that that this restrictive declaration cannot be canceled because of the changes to the zoning. So their opinion is that this is, it's not just my opinion, it's the city council's attorneys.
Okie doke. Marty Bell?
Thank you. It's not just that they haven't built it yet, or can they build a life science building there? I think what is critical is to go back to what was being said at the time. And I think there was basically fraud upon the community board and the city council, because they said they needed to stay in that site. It wasn't just a life science building. They needed to stay in that site because they had research done, even though the research was, and I had calculated it at the time, 3 to 5% of their operations. They said it was critical. They made a big deal out of sickle cell anemia to get buy-ins from many of the communities represented on the city council. They said they needed to keep their sickle cell anemia and other researches within walking distance of the research centers on the Upper East Side. In fact, their lawyer at one of the community board meetings said specifically, and I went back and watched it, not just walking distance, short walking distance. And now it would take, I looked on one of the GPS apps, it would take 8.5 hours to walk from their new site to Rockefeller University. So that's not short walking distance. Also, as part of the fraud that made the building as large as it was, even though you're correct, George, that it, or Anthony, whoever mentioned it, it's down from 334 to 230 feet. It's still higher than the 30 some odd story building across the street from the school. But they said they needed these massive floor plates. And again, they're now up in a site in Westchester where they don't, all of a sudden, they don't need those massive floor plates. And what's really telling is, while they just cut the ribbon this past month to move into the Westchester site, it was announced less than 6 months after the city council approval. So anyone, I think, with real estate experience is going to tell you that you're not just going to 6 months within that 6 month period find a new home, and especially when it's completely the opposite of what was stated in terms of both walking distance to those local areas and within the size of the floor plate. The one thing I will note is that the head of the blood center, who at the time had a salary of $1.2 million, is now over $2 million, and he lives up in Westchester. And maybe what they were talking about for close walking distance was for him to walk to the office because he's close by. But all these researchers, which had to be nearby, all of a sudden they're 15 miles away.
Thank you.
I remember that. It was a big deal about being close to all the other hospitals.
Yeah.
Not just walking distance, short walking distance.
Yeah. But nothing was pushing them away. That their remaining there was implicit in the application. Let's see whom we don't have. Anthony Barrett.
Hi, hi all. Marty, I just want to say I represent on the board of 301 East 66th Street, which is a neighboring building, and we've been involved in litigation over the years with the New York Blood Center. Two other things I'd like to add is they closed Long Island City, where initially they were intending to use that facility as a temporary location during construction. So, and that happened pretty soon after the final approval of from city planning. The second thing is the lease in Westchester is a 30-year lease with 4 5-year options. So it's a 50-year commitment, which is not a temporary location. So these are two issues which they were not honest about, and is something that we will look further into. And Marty, if you have any other issues, we can discuss that, later. But thank you for bringing this up.
Thank you. Maggie?
Yes, thank you. Anthony, that was very helpful. And Marty, that was very helpful. So my question has to do with the when it would be wise or when it would be smart to lay all this out for the city council, meaning not to be premature with it, but to have the timing right as a strategy or as a list of arguments to get the rezoning reversed.
I think both the council, because it was both the city planning and the council who approved it. So I think both of them should be asked to undo their bad work.
And my question is the timing of when that is. I'm worried about it being premature. On the other hand, the history is compelling. The misrepresentation of the factual history is compelling, and the non-moving forward. So I'm really wondering, from those of you on this call a lot smarter than I am about this, about the timing of and how to lay all this out, and then the timing of it. You're right, for both city planning, or maybe more importantly, city planning before the city council.
Okay. Sacha?
Thank you. So I guess just for my own knowledge, I'm less familiar with the nuances of blood center. From my understanding, I know that was like the first time we really saw council member deference go out the window with Ben Kalos. And from my understanding, it was that blood center They wanted to build a brand new facility, but they would remain there. And then there would be commercial life science on the upper portion.
Yeah.
I think, was that it, George?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is there,
Their thing was to remain where it was,
Mhm.
and
Wasn't
it could have been built under the then current zoning.
Yes.
Wasn't it
Yes.
wasn't it 7 floors of
They
commercial
wanted to
space?
build this tower on top, which was commercial, which wasn't.
Seven floors,
Rezoning
wasn't
was
it?
necessary to do what they
Something like that.
regrettably wanted to do. because
Okay.
All
I mean, just to sort of, the blood center was going to be occupying, or is, if they ever do this, no more than the amount of space, and in fact its location in the city, in other words, on that block, on
Mhm.
that lot, and the first 4 or 5 floors were going to remain the blood center, even though it was an
Mhm.
all new building. And then the rest of the building was the commercial lab space, whose construction would pay largely for the construction of the new blood center facility.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you. Is there precedent, or do we see other examples of a rezoning being revoked per se in the past, or would this kind of be a new thing that, people within CB8 are looking to pursue? Because I'm just curious. Again, I think city planning doesn't like this district for many different reasons, that I'm just curious, like, if we look to pursue that as like a first time versus, this has been done, there are examples of it, and the burden of like proof of showing the community was misled, the council was misled. And I will say, I think Marty mentioned it. People got a little, I don't want to say wacky in 2021, but I do remember there was like this emphasis that like the Upper East Side is the medical hub of all of New York City, which is funny because then they also say the Upper East Side doesn't build any housing and is too privileged and has all the hospitals. But then you'll put like, oh, it has to be the medical hub. So I do remember that vaguely, that people got, I think, a little nutty coming out of COVID with that. I will say in general, if people follow like markets and commercial, life sciences is kind of in a quiet spot right now. So I'm not sure if that's why maybe we're not seeing things move for blood center, but I'm really just curious on precedent, if this is done before, and how successful maybe that's been in revoking a rezoning permission, revoking ULURP in essence.
If I can comment on that,
Please, George.
I am unaware of that ever happening in New York City, and
Okay.
I would believe it would be a ULURP action. There would have to be a land use application. There would have to be an environmental review.
Yeah.
There would have to be a sponsor that would pay for that, and DCP would have to agree that that's something that they want to do. So there would be a process to reverse it. It's not, as far as I'm aware, there is no process this was not a conditional rezoning. It was a
Okay.
permanent rezoning. And
Okay.
there is no process to easily undo it other than undoing it through
Yeah.
through the established process.
Okay, that's definitely in the vein of what I was thinking, because I haven't heard of it, and I can see it being extremely onerous to even prove that. Yeah. Okay, thank
But
you.
it is a rezoning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you're saying that we would rezone it to something else,
We
or
would
downzone it.
rezone it to what it had been before.
Yeah, what it
Yeah.
was
But
originally.
it is a rezoning.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Marty?
There was one case, George, of a building on 96th Street that was built higher than it was permitted under the zoning, and they had to remove the top floors to bring it within the zoning.
That was a Department of Buildings error.
Right.
And so that's what they did to correct the Department of Buildings error.
All right.
Yeah, but that is true. That did happen.
Yeah, but if it wasn't a rezoning, they had to take the building down, and they were not in the zoning district that they said they were when
That is
they
correct.
made that application. Anthony Barrett?
Hi. I'm not sure if anyone knows, but at the time, the EDC funded or committed funds for this project. Does anyone know if the Blood Center got anything, or does the city have the money available for this still? That was something, or how would I find out?
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's not something I know anything about.
No,
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. Well, I think that we will.
Oh.
Oh, Marty, yes?
Just one other thing to perhaps provide the incentive, George, that you said, you know, there are going to be costs involved with someone doing this. Part of the approval by the city of this site to build that tower that was approved, I think it was in excess of $400 million of tax benefits allocated to this project. So if they could say, you know, that to me should be a huge incentive for the city not to find a reason to call it what it was, a fraud, and to stop them not only from building what they fraudulently said they needed, but also to then take hundreds of millions of dollars in tax money.
I think one of the things one might request is that the city planning commission do this itself. The city planning commission can rezone on its own. Most of the Upper East Side is are the contextual zones are initiated in the commission, as opposed to, I mean, we've applied to and got rezonings, but it's the commission that has done most of the rezoning on the Upper East Side. So there's nothing to stop us asking them to do it.
If I'm still unmuted, the November 23rd, 2021 Gothamist newspaper has, under the plan, the Board Center would benefit from city and state tax burdens of at least $450 million.
Mm-hmm. Yasmina?
Yeah, just in terms of reinvigorating this, I don't think enough about the environment and the burden on the community of demolishing or building structures of this height is discussed or considered. And, you know, I think it needs to be brought to the forefront, the incredible sacrifice for these rezoning approvals, and to revisit it if the need and justification for this incredible burden is no longer there, it needs to be revisited.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Okay. Oh,
Just one other thing for those who weren't around. This tower is a mid-block tower. It's taller than the buildings along 2nd Avenue, but it is mid-block, and across from a school and closed streets for years. It's insane that it was approved, but now that you can look at it and see quite clearly what I think was fraud, I think, and how much money they were promised, I think there's a lot of incentive to go after them.
Good.
Thank you.
That's a very good idea. Okay, Sasha?
Just a note on mid-block. I hear it come up with this. I hear it come up with Lenox Hill. This board approved the East 94th Street rezoning. That is a mid-block tower that was almost 500 feet, and most people supported it because they went gaga for the words affordable housing. So I think people need to be maybe a little bit more consistent on their stance of mid-block, because Blood Center, I believe, is around 16 stories versus East 94th, which is proposed to be 46. So I would much prefer 16 stories mid-block than 46. And I do think, that kind of height, even though it's taller than other things, it's not that egregious. There are things already in the mid block on different blocks, maybe not on that block, that are closer to that height. And I have to say, again, I care a lot about light and air. A lot of urban planners don't. Like, people really do not care on the inconvenience of construction. Again, 94th Street rezoning, a lot of us testified about what it was like living through Second Avenue subway construction. And people spoke and said, it's New York City. I think you can deal with a little noise. So people are very unrelenting on their ideas of like what they believe is not NIMBYism, but it's always like, well, I don't want to deal with the construction, but you can deal with the construction. And I find a lot of city planners have like their own little joke. Oh, 80% of us live in central Brooklyn. There isn't that much construction in central Brooklyn. They all live on their R6B tree-lined streets with no construction. And they love to talk about people in Manhattan complaining about construction and buildings and all of that going on. But we, in fact, are, as Marco has said, super dense. We are on top of each other. You get cracks from anything. There's perpetual white dust from construction. I know on my block that started with Second Avenue, Subway, and then the Kent and every other building. So I think the general public understandably has a feeling of like what construction does and how onerous it is to live through it. I know much of the public voiced that about the Lenox Hill rezoning. But I think something hospital related is different than luxury housing. But unfortunately, city planning does not care as long as it meets their EIS, the FEIS, in what they have deemed and as the standard under seeker of what constitutes like environmental review and what triggers certain impacts. So, shadows, it has to be an extreme shadow situation for it, to somehow outweigh a public good. And I know that's a frustration people have, but I would say the city and the processes in place consider environmental review, environmental impacts, but it definitely doesn't meet the standard I think regular people feel should be considered. As unfortunate as that may be, but it is brought into account.
Thank you. Alida has not been heard from yet.
Thank you, Elizabeth. In terms of backstory about the blood center, there were a lot of issues that we were concerned about. It wasn't just the height, it was that it was not a residential building, smack in the middle of a residential street, across the street from a school that attracted people from all over the city, including children on the autism spectrum. I don't know if it's okay to say that, and children who had problems with other local high schools, drawn from all over the place. And we were concerned. We were concerned about the truck bays and opening and closing all night long. We were troubled by the BSL-3 lab, that when we asked the city's H&H department to tell us where other BSL-3 labs were, they refused, saying that public knowledge of their location was too dangerous. Yet they were willing to put that in right behind a residential building, across from the school, across from the park. There were a host of issues with the blood center. In addition, the city had offered the blood center 2 pieces of property, one up in Harlem and one down, I think, by Langone. I'm not exactly sure, somewhere in the 30s, I believe. And they turned it down to be close to the hospital. So there was a lot of stuff going on with the blood center. And with East 94th Street, I did not like what was going on. I thought it was way too high. I thought their reaction to the affordable housing was trouble. But it was that, or the specter was raised of another super tall storage building, which would have really been a problem too. Yes, every time affordable housing, there are certain words that are magic words, and affordable housing is one of them. When you append it to anything, people will say yes in favor of affordable housing, regardless of the impact of the rest of it, which again is why I call for a comprehensive city plan. And I will stop there. Sasha, happy to talk to you about any of this if you'd like at any point. Thank you guys for letting me speak.
Alita, can I just add the other 2 magic words in this district? Programmatic needs.
True.
Well, just one tiny comment. I think that Alita, I agree with Alita completely, and she absolutely is remembering correctly. But one of the issues, one of the factors that is constantly mentioned, and it has to do with why city planning is so eager to build any kind of housing at all. And it really has to do with the fantasy that more housing equals lower housing prices. I don't think even with 100,000 more units in Manhattan that rental prices will go down 1 penny. And it is a little bit like supply side economics. It's voodoo housing. It doesn't make any sense. But you cannot shake city planning from that absolute belief that more is somehow going to result in less expense. It's just nonsense.
Could I add just one thing quickly, Anthony?
Sure.
I think I heard Sasha mention that city planning really has it in for this district, and I'm wondering if she could brainstorm with this community board on how to shake that from city planning's grip, so that they could look at us the way they look at every other neighborhood in the city and see us for not only what we want, but what we would like to be in terms of a diverse neighborhood, and economic with economic richness and diversity of all kinds of different kinds of people. And that's what we strive for, and that's what we like to focus on. And city planning, I know, has a view that we are all Park Avenue or Fifth Avenue, and that's simply not true. So maybe some brainstorming at some point would be really valuable. That's it. Done this time. Thank you.
What is this? We're approaching 8:30, and how many people have their paws up now?
It's like 4.
4, is that
It's
it?
like 4, and we have 2 folks. Has Maggie
Who have
spoken?
not spoken.
2 haven't spoken, I don't think, right?
Right.
Okay,
I'll leave that to you, Elizabeth.
well, you know
Yes,
who you are. I
Pallavi.
can't pronounce you.
Pallavi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I remember reading somewhere where Ben Kalis was quoted as saying that the Longfellow developers, that there were rumors that they were no longer involved with the New York Blood Center. And I wonder if that's true, that might be the reason of the delay.
I
We've
have a
heard
think,
that.
I think but don't believe me because I don't know, but I think you may be right.
We've heard it. However, the project still appears on the Longfellow Real Estate Partners website, even as of 15 minutes ago when I looked. And so, you know, who knows?
Mhm.
I mean, we've heard that, but
Yes.
I don't know that we have any evidence that Ben is right or wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jerome?
Yes, that's me. Thanks. So I am less knowledgeable about this topic since I'm like quite new. I've been trying to listen and understand what's going on. And if anyone would like to like help educate me on this would be great. But can I kind of recap what I've heard and then I can like ask my questions? That's all right.
Yeah.
Okay. So from what I understand, the Blood Center wanted to build a larger building, and that required a zoning change. And that zoning change was approved against the wishes of a lot of people. And that zoning change was a permanent change. And it seems like there's been little progress on actually redeveloping that site. And maybe there's like fraud involved. So if there's no progress on making the new Blood Center and it doesn't get built, obviously the zoning change was permanent. So that stays the same, but does that mean that the blood center stays as is? And I'm trying to gauge like what, because right now there's it seems like there's a lot of people who would want to reverse the zoning change. But if because of fraud, the blood center never gets actually built, and we end up with the status quo, then does it make a difference whether we reverse the zoning change or not? And the second question I had was, does the current zoning approval like allow for like more housing on the site? Because I heard that at least from what people were saying was that the that permanent zoning change allowed for some commercial space to be built on top of the blood center housing, and I was wondering if that's only for commercial or if, for example, if that zoning change was to stay the same, but the blood center doesn't get built and maybe it gets redeveloped into something else, is it possible to build more housing on top of it instead of only commercial? Thanks.
The short answer is no, because of the restricted covenant that does not allow anything but a life sciences type building on the site. So that's the short answer, is that even if they don't do anything, it will in fact just, they don't do anything. It's not like they'll build anything but a health science building on the site, I think.
Yeah, well, I think George had wanted to answer. Where's George?
I'm here.
Good.
What Anthony has said about the uses is right. The only thing is that if they do try to cancel the restrictive declaration, then you could actually do a residential tower on the site. But you'd have to get over that hurdle of removing the restrictive declaration, which, again, according to the opinion of the legal counsel at City Council, that's something that they are not eligible to do. But, there are creative attorneys in New York City, so I would never write it out.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to ask people to make it brief. And who was first, Maggie or Yasmina?
Thanks. I'll make it very.
Okay, Maggie.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 I don't know if it was Sasha, but one of the speakers referenced the articles, the press articles description that this tower was going to be 16 stories. But in fact, it was being referenced as 16 stories because of the high ceilings. I don't remember whether the building was having 16-foot or 18-foot stories. In fact, would be the equivalent if it were an apartment building, and Marty, you'll remember this better than I, the equivalent of, I think, of about 30 stories, 234 feet tall, thereabouts, was the equivalent of what we would think of as not 16 stories at all. On the environmental issues, much of what I was going to say was covered by Lita. I'll just reference that an enormous damaging environmental, direct environmental impact would be the high velocity, high intensity mechanicals, the fans, the high velocity fans that are required in life science buildings that have wet labs as opposed to dry labs. And these, what the design for this building was for wet labs. These high velocity fans, which were, according to the design, going to be placed on 2 floors. There were so many of them. One on the top floor, the roof way up high, but the other, as I recall, on the 7th floor, directly opposite the school that Alita described, 3,000 students. There comes in not only blowing this out, this contaminated air onto the school, onto the park, onto the residential buildings around, but it being on a mid-block, and that was the part of the importance of the mid-block side street. It's a 63 or 65 foot wide side street. That's how narrow it was. So I don't know if we're cutting, if we're threading the needle too thin here, but different from a wide 4-lane, 5-lane avenue that intensifies the environmental damage. The other environmental issues Alita brought up, there's a great deal more than just the shadows. But the Blood Center and the lobbyists hammered and hammered and hammered at the shadows and calling it a 16-story and perpetuated that. Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. Yasmina.
Very quick question. I initially had joined this meeting because I saw that after hours variance permits were on the agenda a couple days ago, but that seemed to change. Will that be on for the next meeting? Because
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, it will.
we have some serious issues with that at 1233 York Avenue.
Yes, and the reason that we pushed it off to next month was the availability of someone from the Department of Buildings.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent.
Very good. Well, Ed?
Yeah. Well, and Yasmin, I know you sent some emails about that, and thank you, Anthony, because that's what we were talking about before. So I guess this is the end portion of the meeting. I don't know. We'd like to I see Gail's hand up. I think I have an idea why. But before that, I would like to thank everyone. George Janes, as always informative when you come. Great discussion, everybody. A plug for next month's meeting, July 22nd, looking at the calendar. And a quick shameless plug for Sherry Weiner and myself for our meeting tomorrow evening, the Voting Reform and Charter Revision Task Force meeting. We will have the Honorable Catherine Freed there talking about open primaries. Very timely topic, I think, given today some sort of voting thing is happening today, if I remember correctly. Anyway, I will turn it over to Gail.
Before we go to a move for adjournment. I just wanted to point out that it is very possible next week that city planning will be voting on Northwell's proposal to redevelop Lenox Hill Hospital. At least that is what we have heard. And so what I want to urge people to do, although we don't have an exact date next week or even the week after, to make sure that you reach out to the City Planning Commission to find out when the date is, but let them know if you're certainly not in favor of the 436-foot tower, to let them know your displeasure, and also to reach out to Keith Powers and ensure that he is supportive of our concerns, and perhaps this time we'll have member deference. I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, because I think if they don't hear from us, even at the last minute, suddenly it's the community isn't that concerned.
And
Thank
just
you, Gail.
parenthetically, I think tomorrow is the last day for, no.
I can tell you that it was not on the agenda for July 2nd, that they published their agenda. So they will not be voting on July 2nd for Lenox Hill Hospital. That likely means they will hold a special meeting on July 14th, which is their review date. That is the best guess for when it's going to be, but we know it is not going to be next week.
Oh, good.
Bastille Day.
But we still should, if we have concerns, the more people who reach out at this point in time, the better.
And they have to vote by the 14th. They cannot vote any later than that.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Gail. Gail, was there something else that you wanted to raise?
No, other than a move for adjournment.
Ah, second. Okay. Thanks, everyone.